Welcome to Design plus Build Talk. My name is Tammy Polenz, and I'm here with R-Weeks today, and we're talking about optimistic curiosity and how it equals success. So R-Weeks, the first time I met him, which was at a Christmas grill party, he was telling me about how the last 25 years, he's been really kind of pretending to be an architect in his role. And that's kind of transitioned from pretending to be this architect to consulting and helping and assisting developers, architects, engineers, and contractors and other clients, and helping to with business strategies to develop better business. So one of the things that you had mentioned to me when we were talking is that a lot of people call you a Pollyanna, and
Yeah.
I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but thank you for taking the time to do the Design Build Talk with me today.
Oh, of course, this is going to be fun. And yeah, I think some people call me a Pollyanna in, just joking around, and a few call me a Pollyanna and actually mean it. And those are the ones that hurt. But what I like to do is, provide evidence for optimism every time I would, talk to anybody about any kind of project or anything happening in Cleveland. There's a lot of hard data out there that we need to watch, and I think there's lots of evidence to be optimistic. And you just have to be curious to go out and find that data.
I love the optimistic approach. I'm a very optimistic person. I think a realist too, and you've kind of mentioned that you're that way too. It's not necessarily a bad thing, especially in, after 2020, and we're looking at 2021, and we're trying to figure out like how to navigate the next year and beyond that. And having an optimistic attitude has been a little bit difficult for a lot of reasons. We were talking about a few things. We were talking about how, the media doesn't necessarily promote optimism, and that people are stuck in kind of this fear place, and not necessarily the best place to be when you're trying to figure out business development, or how do we find projects, or how do we navigate changes. On another note, some of it is that people are impacted negatively. There's been a lot of changes in our economy. There's been a lot of changes in the workforce, the way we do work, the way we collaborate, the way we do business, the way we navigate, dealing with family matters and family life while we're trying to do all that other stuff. And some people have also been thrown into some unexpected changes, and that can be scary as well. That can really entice some of that fear.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think that what happens is, one of the things you have to be careful about is because some people will come back at you. It's like, how can you be so happy when everything's going to crap right now? You know what I mean? Because there's a lot of people who are suffering and things like that. And you got to be sensitive to that and understand that, even when things aren't going perfectly, you can still remain optimistic, and you can still have you got to have hope, right? You have to look at something and say, okay, we're gonna figure it out. We're gonna get through it. So
I like when we were talking recently that there's a lot of these sort of stories, Zoom calls and videos about the negativity that's going on. And when we talked, it was this really positive, uplifting conversation. And we both kind of came up with the idea of like, how do we share that with other people so that they can feel more positive about moving forward? And through the course of our conversation, it was really kind of navigating life differently and transitioning from kind of fear-based decisions to more curiosity in your life, and curiosity to entice optimism.
Yeah, I think that's super important. I think everybody, have you ever met a pessimistic entrepreneur? I don't think so. I mean, you have to have the optimism and the curiosity curiosity to find an idea that you think the market needs, right? And then you have to have the optimism to say, okay, I'm going to go out and make this widget, or I've got this service, or I've got this great idea, or I'm writing this great book, or whatever. You have to have the optimism that that's going to succeed before you even start. So it's critically important.
Yeah, and it really is a basis for curiosity. It's a lot of times when we're trying to accomplish something, whether it's create a widget or start a business or solve a problem for a project, like when, as an architectural firm, levelHEADS is always looking to solve problems and create spaces that function for the users. Like, how do you do that? You have to come from a place of curiosity. And in the place of curiosity, it's really kind of an uplifting, I think, alpha wavelength in the brain sort of place, and definitely pulls you out of any sort of that negative energy place where you typically are. And if we
Yeah.
keep this in mind, like you were saying, that it can be a basis for solving other problems, like if
Oh
you
yeah.
did have a career change, or if you do have to do business development and you're trying to figure out how to get out there and drum up business during a difficult time. So I thought it would be great to talk a little bit more about that, and maybe some of the approaches that you kind of take to give people and viewers an idea of how curiosity can be helpful.
Well, in the whole realm of business development, architecture and design has been changing rapidly over the last, decade, and even more rapidly in the last year, obviously, with what we're doing online. But I think the holistic approach that designers are taking, like levelHEADS does. I mean, you've got the whole. It's not just the building that you're thinking about. You're thinking about the interior, the environment, the program. What are your objectives? What are your missions? It's a very curious approach that I think that you guys take, knowing your portfolio. And I think that's really critical right now, because there are going to be so many components of architecture that are going to be automated, that we're going to have to, architects, engineers, even contractors are going to have to get back to those things that only a human can do. You know what I mean? There's a lot of creative things that only a human can. You can't automate creativity, in my mind. I mean, the AI gurus say they can, and they have these robots that can paint beautiful pictures, but I think that's all bunk. The truly creative notion, you're not going to be able to replicate. I mean, AI could replicate what Thomas Edison did, because he just repeated things over and over and over and over and over and over again until he got it right. But AI can't replicate what Nikola Tesla did, because he just went to sleep, had a dream, and said, "Oh my God, I can do this." I mean, that's the kind of thing that can't be replicated. That's the kind of thing that I think we have to focus on. Is that where you're going with that question, or did I ramble
Yeah,
on to
no,
a
I
different
think
thing?
that's absolutely true. And I think part of what you're saying also ties into kind of reinventing yourself, right? So if you're
Absolutely.
placed in a position, whether it's your
Yeah.
organization and you have to rethink your entire model of how you do business, or you have to rethink your entire model of how do you drum up business, or rethink your model and how the way operations work, or say that you were laid off and you're out looking for a new position, and there's not really positions doing what you were doing before. Maybe you have to reinvent yourself, and how do you do that? And so reinventing kind of yourself or your business or your operations is ties into that creativeness. And you're right, it can't be automated. I mean, some of these things can be automated, but it means kind of elevating out of your current state, elevating from where you were before, when you're kind of in the forest and you can't see the trees for the forest, or however that saying goes. When you're in the thick of it, you can't necessarily problem solve and creatively think about new ways of doing things. So sometimes having like this abrupt change that's unexpected causes you and encourage you and
Yeah.
makes you have to rethink about the way you're doing things.
Oh yeah. And the pandemic and its shutdown. I mean, everybody lost a lot. I lost a lot personally, professionally, and but and it's taught us a lot. It's taught us how fragile we all are. But what we have to do is recognize that reinvention might be driven by an external force at any moment. So you've got to be kind of ready for it. And if you're in the strategy and business development, end of, trying to, see to it that companies know where the future might be, you have to be a generalist and be reading a lot of different things about, okay, what happens if this happens, if this happens, if this happens. So it's being open to adaptation at a moment's notice. And, I mean, everything hits the fan and you can't panic. You have to go, okay, now what do we do? Rather than, and if you look at it, we were really lucky in this, and it sounds crazy, but I mean, technology was at that point where it was able to save us. Do you know what I mean? A few years earlier, and the virtual meeting wasn't, that good, and virtual, collaboration over the internet wasn't that great. So we were on the way to the work from anywhere kind of, movement. We were on the way already to do that. People are already able to do that. This just accelerated it drastically. And it's a shock to a lot of people. So, but it's being curious all the time for the next thing that's going to hit you or hit everybody.
I like the way that you approach that, in the sense that, like, that curiosity led to new technologies that we didn't necessarily appreciate until now, when we were forced to use those technologies. And now the interesting thing is, because we were forced to use those technologies, we're coming up with incredibly creative ways. There's whole new businesses that are evolving out of this change. So sometimes people look at change as a negative thing and a scary thing, but really it kind of forces us to evolve as human beings. And both you and I have gone through complete career changes in the last so many years. And maybe we should, talk about that a little bit, because it ties into this. And, what was the career change? What enticed it? And how did that make you grow? And how did you feel in the beginning? But then how did you feel after you went through that growth?
When I worked as a project manager, senior project manager, vice president of business development for several architectural firms around Cleveland. And, what happens in many businesses, especially architecture, you'll wind up, you'll never do it ever again. You just start selling it. That's all you'll ever do. And you get to a point in your career when, candidly, you get expensive, right? And the larger firms who might be able to afford you don't really need you, because all their project managers really understand the doer seller model, and they have a marketing staff, and they have all these people. They would be able to afford you, but they don't really need you because everyone else is doing what they're supposed to do. The smaller firm, though, who may be struggling with the doer seller model because they have a small staff, or they have, there are many factors in why they're not doing it the way they ought to, or the way they could be doing it. So, but they can't afford they couldn't afford that, right? So what I decided is, okay, what I'll do is I'm going to help multiple people. Instead of selling myself to one company, I'll rent myself to multiples, and I'll have more fun, and I'll make more money. And I've had a lot of fun, and it's satisfying when you've helped somebody, even in a small endeavor, like an 8-month or 12-month endeavor, where you brought somebody to a new market. Because I was going to limit myself to architecture, design, construction, development. And then I met a guy who was into software development, and they did a lot of software for the medical field. But with the Internet of Everything, they wanted to get in touch with the contracting market and contractors and engineers. And I helped them for a year, just introduced them to a bunch of people, set up a bunch of, meetings for, this is what this group can do for you. And they can do handheld timesheets and all sorts of great things with geofencing and stuff. And that was just a short contract. And it was really good, because it's like, okay, it might take me 12 to 18 months to ramp you up and get enough, where you're on your feet. And it did. It was like 12 months later, we had a great relationship. And then there was a plastic injection molding company I worked with for a short time, doing the same thing. So it's that variety that I really liked in architecture, doing something different every day. And there's even more of a variety now with what I do. One of my favorite clients is Jameson Ricca. We do historic windows. And that was the same thing. It's like, give me a year to 18 months and I'll show you how to do this. And after 18 months, I went to the owner. I said, "You're getting good at this." And he told me, he said, "Yeah, Rob, I hate doing it. Why don't you just keep doing it for me?" So I've been working with them now for 7 years. And, it's fabulous walking through old buildings in Cleveland and rehabbing them. And it's, I don't know, it's, architects, I think, teasingly call old buildings, it's like, architect porn. You go through an old building and it's like, you find just the most incredible things in old structures. So
But through the course of you kind of making this shift in your career, now you're kind of picking up all these new skill sets. And what we
Yeah.
talked about is how when you're working with clients, and you should tell us maybe a little bit more about, what your main role is in with your business as a consultant, but you kind of work with a lot of different clients and you're able to bring a lot of different solutions because of all these new skill sets that you've developed. So
Yeah.
it sounds like even though you made a career change, maybe it wasn't exactly what you wanted initially, maybe it was, which maybe for some other people, but because you're picking up these skill sets, that's your growth, and that growth has led you to more opportunity.
Yeah, and I tell people that there isn't a silver bullet. I mean, there's a lot of consultants out there who, know one method of doing things, and this is a method that will work for everyone, and I don't believe that at all. I believe that even amongst very similar companies, there's going to be different ways, and the different companies are going to respond differently to, maybe one company is really well positioned for a Dale Carnegie kind of system, and the other one might be well positioned for a Sandler system, and then another one might be very well positioned for the Harvard Business version of. There's a bunch of different strategy concepts to consider, and then adopt the one that fits you best, or don't adopt any of them and sort of create your own from picking pieces and parts of every one of those. It has to be very customized, especially for a professional services, delivering professional services like architecture, engineering, legal, contracting, the whole schmear. If you're delivering that and it's relationship based business, you're not selling widgets. Where you're selling widgets, you need 1 million contacts so you can sell 100,000 widgets, right? In this kind of realm, you need, just dozens of contacts, because you don't need 1 million things. You just need a dozen good clients to keep you going. And and in that relationship building thing, you have to build the trust, and you have to, I mean, to get a long-term relationship going, it takes a long time. It's, the sales cycle doesn't work. I mean, trying to track your sales cycle in a lot of these like CRM devices that are out there, it's like, well, you might be chasing a client for years. And if that client's going to be your anchor client for years after you get them, it's worth it. You don't bail out on somebody just because they're at the moment not in need of the services you deliver. You have to just be there and present, so that when they do need you, you can be there.
Yeah. So it sounds like just being curious about a lot of different things, being curious about your problems, being curious about solving problems has kind of led you to extended in building more relationships over time. I kind of work in the same way. Everything is so interconnected that you never know when IT can help you in architecture. You never know when, building a widget can help you in another project, and being able to connect people the way I do it. And I kind of went through a change too. As you know, I was in health and wellness for years, and then wasn't jumping out of bed after 30 years to tell people to exercise and give me 20 more push-ups, or teach them about protein, fats, and carbs one more time. It was creating and solving problems and developing new spaces, and then implementing new business models. And that's when I connected with levelHEADS, probably 5 or 6 years ago, consulting with them. And then after I had built out my last gym, I was asked to come on board full time, and made the leap of leaving fitness right before COVID hit and into the design world. So it was, a blessing in disguise, and, a lot of growth. But also, I think a lot of opportunity to take all of those curious skills that I developed over time, and then implement new strategies, even within our model, that help to improve efficiencies. Like you were talking about Zoom calls or platforms that are centrally focused, where all of our collaborators can connect and see the same thing. So those are some of the things that I've done. And I've been allowed to do that because I'm not necessarily in the design forest. I get to kind of overview things from a higher level, and determine through curiosity, hey, is there a better way of doing this? Or, yeah, I know I'm talking to this person about this project, but I remember meeting this person through health and wellness or fitness or my gym in downtown Cleveland. And I think that there's some sort of connection, whether it's maybe it's not immediately, but you never know where that could lead down the road. So that to me is when you step away from strategy of always saying like, this is how many people I have to call, this is how many contacts I have to make, this is how I, the kind of like
Well, those
this
are tactics you're
regimented,
talking about. Yeah, I
right?
mean, the raw numbers of how many contacts you call, and that's all the tactics in it. The strategy is making sure you're calling the right person. If you
Yes,
could
yes.
figure, if there was a magic bullet and you could figure out, okay, what is the perfect cold call, and every time you made that cold call, you closed a deal, well, you wouldn't have to make that many calls. But that's absurd. That's, on its face, that's absurd. So, but it's the strategy of making sure you're making those high priority calls and you're building those high priority relationships. And, at first you're not, I mean, I think everybody hates the cold call that the first thing they say out of their mouth is their elevator pitch or whatever you want to call it. And it's like, oh, come on, don't do this to me. And, but I guess those things work because everyone gets the car warranty calls. So, and
Yeah.
it's like you said, your curiosity is, I mean, you spend enough time in one place and you're a curious person to begin with, and you're going to wind up getting restless, and because you want to feed that curiosity. And the wise companies, and I think levelHEADS was wise to bring you aboard, knows that we find those curious individuals and they're going to bring us stuff that we don't even know that they're going to bring us. Do you know what I mean? It's one of those kind of things where you have to be open to those curious notions that, might, it's like, okay, that's not exactly into our plan, but it's in the direction we want to go. And that's those, I don't know if you've seen those charts where it's like, the course of your company isn't exactly linear. It's got like a conical shape to it, where you could be in the next 20 years. You know what I mean? You could expand, you could contract, but it's kind of like there's a bunch of different things you might be able to do in the next 20 years, 5 years, whatever your event horizon is going to be. But you sort of map that out so that, the curious idea comes up and it's like, okay, that's in the right direction, but it's over here to the right or left or up or down, but it's in the right direction. And that's where we want to be. That's the kind of thing you have to start thinking of. And you have to be a futurist a little bit to think about it that way, where, what happens if?
That's how Design+BuildTalk came about. How do
Yeah.
it came about because, well, we're in the middle of this pandemic, nobody's meeting. And there was a space where it's like, how do you connect with people? How do you keep people excited about like what's happening in the design build world? And, working with Chris Trotta has been great because he, I tossed an idea his way and he goes, yeah, sure. Let's see how it goes. And, the very first video we did, we had 1,700 impressions and 500 views and some interactions. And so I think it'll be interesting to see how it evolves over time. But the objective is to talk about unique topics and, bring people some solutions. So, if we're looking at, stepping away from fear and jumping more into the idea of optimistic curiosity, then, or curious optimism, however, which way you want to spin it. Do you have any suggestions for our viewers on how to start getting more curious in order to equate business to success or their new lifestyles to success?
I think, when you are reading the news, read local news, stay away from national news, I think. And then if you are going to go for news outside and news about, I go to foreign sources all the time, but read every news article, very closely rather than just with, like just to take whoever's writing it, don't take their word for everything that's written down. Get the facts and research it a little bit. And I think that, the local trades are much better than the local regular press. You know what I mean? Like Cranes and Properties and those types of publications are much better because they're going to come out. They're going to be getting into some better detail on what those developments are all about. And just in the last few weeks, we've had some fantastic news. We've got the The Cleveland Clinic and Jobs Ohio with innovation. I mean, that's $500 million for pathogen research. It's going to bring 20,000 jobs to the region and to that location in the next 10 years. That's gigantic. And you look at what's happened to Euclid Avenue over the past, 10 years. That's amazing. And, I mean, it's not just Euclid Avenue, it's West 25th, it's East 4th. The next street is Superior. I mean, Superior is going nuts. You read about, Cross Country Mortgage that's going to adapt a few buildings down on, it's near 21st and Superior. GBX is down there. They're huge into we have so much that we can really be happy about and be forward looking about with the developers that we have kept in Cleveland. It's an amazing story. I mean, RMS, the Ratner Miller Shafron organization, Van Aken Phase 2 was announced. The Van Aken project is going well. It's a beautiful project. And the Ratners, Forest City, they could go anywhere in the world and develop. They choose to develop here because they love Cleveland. You look at people like Michael Panzica, who just started his own development company a couple of years ago, maybe even 1 year ago. But Church and State over on the west side, he came back from Chicago. He could have done what he's doing here in Chicago, but he came back to do it here. We're really fortunate with a really nice, class of visionary entrepreneurs like the Ratners, who have been here forever. I mean, Tower City and the Avenue. When they developed that was a long shot. And yes, you can say it's not working right now, but you know what? It was worth a shot, and they created some really beautiful space. It's going to get used again. You look at what Bedrock's planning down there. It's, we have a lot going for us here that we just don't always pay attention to. And I'm not sure if it's a Cleveland issue, because I've noticed other cities say the same thing about themselves. They say, oh, we're too critical over our own errors or our own flaws and warts or whatever, because every city has them, right? I mean, we have a huge problem with illiteracy and poverty, and we do have to get over all of that. But we also have to remember that while we're worried and trying to get over all of these, the digital divide that's really, really hurting a lot of people who don't have the access to Zoom or the internet even, that, while we're worried and working on that, we also have to grow and be successful so that we can pay for all the stuff that we need to do to bring those people up, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think we're really fortunate.
We definitely are here in Cleveland. There's so many opportunities for projects. There's projects that are underway. There's different corridors, green corridors, and some of the developers that you've talked about, Millennia Companies, the Huntington building, lots of things kind of on the forefront. And Cleveland is really kind of doing well. As you were talking, it reminded me of a book that I read recently, and it was the prosperity paradigm. And I'm drawing a blank on the author, but I'll put it below the video. And one of the things that he stated, and it completely ties into what we're talking about here, is that, when we have these problems, whether they're illiteracy or it's poverty, that we tend to try to throw money at it and say there's a problem and approach it in the wrong way. And if we just shift our mindset and get curious and understand that it's a consumption problem, and if we can build the infrastructure that solves the consumption problem so that everyone has the opportunity to consume learning, to consume whatever it might be, then that's when poverty heals itself. That's when some of these age-old problems that have impacted the world without resolution end up kind of going away. And I thought it was a great approach to thinking about problem solving very differently. And like you're saying, we have all these opportunities. So if we can just look at things and going, if there's a problem here, like, how do we address that problem with a solution? What's the creative approach to do that? And when we do that, then that equates to that success model that we've been talking about today.
Yeah, and we have, I think that it's a paradox, because we have a labor shortage coming up. We have a huge labor shortage on the horizon with all this development coming up. But we also have an unemployment problem, and we have a lot of people who just need to be, educated in, just the trades. We need to, I don't suggest that we abandon, looking at the STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, but we also have to focus on, welders, carpenters, plumbers, and, steel workers, bricklayers. And I think, with the labor shortage in construction that's coming up, we could put everyone to work if we train everybody. So there's a lot of things that we need to do to, that I think are out there. We just stay curious and optimistic that we can do these things. And I think we can get through it without having to import a whole bunch of labor who might just come in and then after they're done leave, which would be no good.
Right. And the other thing too, is I hear a lot of people talking about how there are jobs that we're losing in the market and jobs that are going overseas and jobs that are, but I think that if we just adjust our thinking to understand, like at one point in time, there was no industry, and then there was the Industrial Revolution, and then that brought about problems. And we've kind of shifted from the Industrial Revolution to a completely different era. And there's a lot of technology and service related stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But instead of always looking at what was and complaining about what was and having this kind of negative viewpoint of like, oh, we're losing something and then grieving that, instead, if we could take a different perspective and say, okay, that industry is diminishing and it seems like it's diminishing organically. What is organically popping up? And maybe there's not an industry there yet, but there's that gap of like, here's the problem, what's the solution? And that is where I believe, that's from my perspective, if we just stop trying to hold on to the old and look at what is the world presenting us organically and how do we solve for that, then all kinds of new things like the Industrial Revolution, like computers, like iPhones, all that newness, if we just always continue to look, to the future, not to say that we completely neglect old models, but we look and we say, hey, what are the opportunities before us? Instead, it can help with creating jobs and creating industries and things that we're unaware of. But also, like you mentioned, there is a job shortage in the area. I've been hearing about that the last couple of years since I've been with levelHEADS. And, what's the way to address that? And maybe that means getting creative in our industry and some of our leaders in the industry, whether they're developers or whether they're architects. And maybe we get more of industry leaders to talk to kids, to go into schools, to develop educational programs, to entice the desire to learn about these different trades so that we can start filling roles and providing jobs and eliminating some of these problems.
Yeah, there's a good program called the ACE Mentorship Program, ACE, Architecture, Contracting, and Engineering. I volunteered as a mentor a long time ago for a short while, and it's going into high schools and giving them a fake project to develop, to design and construct. It's really an interesting kind of concept. I think they're around in like 8 or 9 high schools in Cleveland, and they're opening up an Akron chapter right now. But the important thing is to get these kinds of ideas in front of kids when they're young, because if you don't know what an architect, a developer, or a contractor does, you know what a carpenter does. But you don't know what an architect or a developer actually does. If you don't know what that is when you're young, you don't know how to dream about it. So you get this stuff in front of kids early, and it's like, hey, I think I want to do something like that. You have to know something before you can even, sometimes before you can dream about it. And if it's not brought to you in some sort of educational format, you're not going to get it ever. So.
Yeah, and I think there are limitations with what people think they know what those roles are, right? So kids may say, well, my dad fixes things around the house, and it's not necessarily the same thing. And then, once you kind of introduce like all the various stages of what it takes to build a building and how many people are involved, like I could imagine that would entice curiosity and imagination.
You bring up a good point, because, if you just go into the general public and you say, that, this person's a developer, they develop real estate, they may go, oh, they're just a greedy developer. Completely wrong impression. As anyone in the, in the design, development, construction community recognizes the risk involved is pretty gigantic. I mean, a lot of these developers who are very successful are, just the small population that made it. It's there's a lot of people who don't, and the risk is enormous. And it's like, yeah, they're making a lot of money now, but they started off, well, like Frank Sanito at Millennia, started off in housing, not a glamorous type of developer, but well, guess what? He owns Key Tower now, right? Look at Karen Paganini and Doug Price. I mean, they start out, they buy a small apartment building, they improve it a little bit, they start making a little bit of money, they go, oh, let's buy another one. Oh, let's buy another one. Oh, let's buy another one. But that takes 20 years to do. But guess what? He owns the Terminal Tower now. So it's you only, if you only see the end result and you go, oh, they just got there because they're greedy. It's like, no, they put a lot of work into this. And there was a lot of risk involved in it. And
Yeah, and creativity, like learning, right?
Oh yeah, and all of Euclid and Superior and every old building that's been rehabbed has been rehabbed with historic tax credits. And the I don't want to say uneducated, but those people who aren't really well informed with the whole math of that don't recognize that for every $1 of tax credit that is awarded, $6 of taxes come back to the state. That's a 6-to-1 return on an investment that the government puts together. It's kind of amazing. And the only reason it's not really widely known is because it's not controversial. Newspapers, oh, this government program works great. Oh, okay, that's not exciting to read about. Until you walk down Euclid Avenue and you recognize that every building is now, I mean, with the completion of John Hartness Brown into Euclid Grand, every building is now rehabbed. I mean, it's remarkable from what it was just 10 years ago, 15 years ago.
And that's a lot. You do a lot of work with that.
Yeah. And I do a lot of, I mean, like we talked about Jameis Henrica, that my favorite client with the historic windows. When you adapt a building and you have to replace the windows, those windows have to match the windows that were originally there, or you don't get your tax credits. So it's very important that you get a very accurate window. And Jameis Henrica, I mean, we use multiple manufacturers, so we can do all the in-house engineering and design and consulting. So we'll actually tell you when your windows are fine. You don't need to replace them, just, So yeah, it's an amazing return on not just the investment to the state, but now rehabbing, whole streets, whole neighborhoods. And, it's every couple of years it comes up in the budget where the governor, gets, scratches his head and wonders, why are we spending all this money? And we have to call them up with I'm involved with a number of organizations like NAOP and ULI, Cleveland Restoration Society. And with NAOP, we do a lot of advocacy. And actually today I'd be in Washington, D.C. on our annual chapter leadership and legislative retreat, where we go and, talk to all of our congressmen and senators about important real estate issues. So kind of sad that I'm not in DC. Well, I'm kind of sad that I'm not in DC, and DC isn't what it was last year. Do you know what I mean? So
yeah. But to get back what you were saying prior to that, it's in the real estate world, I think the one thing that we need, real estate, design, build, talk world, we need to stay focused on what the possibilities are. There are a lot of things that are in the works, but there are a lot of things that people haven't envisioned or imagined yet. And there are some great people out there that are continuing to imagine kind of a new Cleveland or a progressive area, right? And that's if when we're doing that and we're figuring out how we can connect people and help them to solve problems and support them and then kind of see things in new eyes, that's how we can remain in that optimistic place, because we're kind of in a creative brain.
Yeah.
And we're coming close to the end of the talk here. So
Okay.
do you have any suggestions for people in order to kind of get in that mindset and how they can apply some skills or techniques to do
Yeah.
that as we're trying
Yeah.
to re-envision ourselves and re-envision Cleveland and re-envision
I think
models of business?
I think it's, read some of the classics rather than just the modern business books and things like that. I mean, I've always liked philosophy, and just the other day, someone rephrased a quote from Socrates that I called him out on, and it was I think the quote is something like every conversation needs to begin with candor, intelligence, and goodwill. And they had just rephrased it a little bit and claimed it as their own. And I said, no, no, Socrates said that 2,500 years ago. So he kind of beat you to that one. And so there's a lot of things like that. I don't know, read a lot of Dr. Seuss. How's that?
I'm a big fan of
Oh,
Dr. Seuss.
the places you'll go is a great book. And that was his last book. And it's a good one. But I mean, remaining curious, I think you do have to kind of try to take I don't want to say a childish look, but a child's eye view of things and in wonder, you know what I mean? And say, like, I wonder what would happen if we did this, and that's what kids are so good at, I wonder what would happen if I dropped this glass, would it break? You know what I mean? Just have that sense of wonderment and curiosity. And I think that it's sometimes lost when we're so stressed out about a deadline, and and there's definitely times you're not going to be able to do that because you are stressed out about a deadline, but you got to keep you know what I mean, you got to keep that that curiosity alive. And I think there are multiple ways to do that, and I think it's reading, research, and just keeping your eyes open. What do you
Yeah,
think?
I agree. Well, I have to say that was one of my kids' favorite books when I read it to them. It's one of my favorites, and I've given it to
Yeah.
clients in the past. It's very deeply psychological in terms of like life and where it takes you. But yeah, just, I think being like little children, I think one of the best things that I heard recently was sometimes when we have an objective and we know exactly how that objective is supposed to turn out, that we limit ourselves immediately to other possibilities.
True.
And to your point of like dropping a glass and what would happen, what if you asked the question but you didn't immediately answer it and you let it kind of ruminate in your mind and let your mind take you to places that kids often go without having these limitations of, I know exactly how this is going to turn out. So I like that.
Never
suggestion.
assume anything. Look at things from all different directions. So I think we mentioned there was a number of different, business models and strategy models, and there's the Six Sigma stuff. And I think within that, they say for every business decision, ask yourself like 5 whys, answer 5 whys with that. So I think that's a good kind of approach, but it's cherry picking. It's not saying that I think everything in Six Sigma, especially the tongue twister that it is really good, but there's good things in all of those different strategies, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you so much for
Of course.
joining me on this Design Build Talk today, just to talk about like positive ways of kind of navigating the new world and staying in an optimistic mindset. Can you please tell people how to get a hold of you?
You can get a hold of me. Let's see. The fastest way is email r-weeks at r-weeks.com. You can, let's see. Should I give you I won't, this isn't going to go to the world. So my phone number is 216-407-1062. But make sure you leave a message because I don't return calls from, but the phone thinks everybody who's not a registered number is spam now. So that's the easiest way to get a hold of me.
Great. And I'll have all that contact information below.
Sure.
I'll have your LinkedIn and your websites and all that for people to be able to reach out to you. And don't forget,
follow me
viewers.
on LinkedIn. That's the best way, probably.
Okay. Yeah.
Then you could just follow and lurk, and you don't have to actually talk to me if you don't want to.
And you can see what's happening in your world. That's good.
Yeah, yeah.
But thank you everyone for joining. Please don't forget to follow our YouTube page and to like our LinkedIn and our social media sites, and sign up for our newsletters. Definitely keep in mind that we're going to be having these design build talks coming up. So join us later at another one. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you.